Thanks for joining us today. My name is Glenn Manning. I'm the Senior Project Manager for Caring Schools at Harvard's Making Caring Common. We're really excited to share with you today a strategy that will be used, that you can use to leverage student leaders, trumpet their voices during conversations and decision making that will be focused on things like equity and inclusion, student well-being, school culture and climate. Our School Climate Committee strategy, which is what we'll be talking about today, is a helpful tool that you can use to prepare over this summer or even begin to integrate this year. But especially as you're thinking about the year ahead, while it is meant for students in grades 6 through 12, it can be very easily modified to work with students in grades, say, 3 through 5, maybe even into the lower grades. And I'm always happy to follow up after the webinar offline and share some ideas for how to do that modification. Always excited to be building this virtual community with you. I am very thankfully joined here today, and I'm incredibly lucky to have with me Elise Kaufman. Elise, maybe you can introduce yourself, say hello, and let us know where you're coming from and what your role is at this point.
Hi everyone, my name is Elise. I was a high school social studies teacher and debate coach. And this year I'm wrapping up my master's at HGSC. And I've had the privilege of working with Making Caring Common all year long. So glad to be here with you.
Elise is super modest, and she won't tell you that she's also been accepted to and will be attending a PhD program in the fall. So we are celebrating her and are very excited for that big adventure. So congrats again, Elise. Want to just take a quick minute as people are still piling into the webinar here to talk a little bit about our Caring Schools Network. Our team is really here to help you all gather good information about your school culture and climate, use that information and guide you through a process with targeted strategies that first are going to really enable you to build relationships and connection next year. We think that this is an incredibly important step, especially as we are all coming back from this time period and reconnecting. So we'll really focus on building those relationships, those connections in classrooms, in the hallways, in schools, across the campus, as well as at home. From there, we are really going to be sort of doubling down and digging deeply into the kinds of skills that students will need to then go ahead and challenge them to care across difference. Things like listening deeply and asking caring questions. And hopefully by the end of the year, complexifying that work and again, challenging both students and the adults in their lives to expand their circles of concern, to understand and seek out justice and deconstruct systemic injustices. So, hope that you'll let us know if we can be helpful in any of those regards. Again, happy to share a lot more information about the Caring Schools Network and how we'll be working with schools next year. Very exciting new developments on that front. So please do be in touch. Today, we're going to speak a little bit about the strategy that I mentioned a second ago in general, and then I'll dive a little bit more deeply into that strategy and discuss how it can be used to help incorporate, as I said a minute ago, student voice into school culture and climate decisions. By the end, we'll leave plenty of time for questions. So if you have them, I hope that you will use the Q&A function. I'll also be asking you a series of questions, getting your feedback as we move along here today. We'll go ahead and drop a link to the full virtual version of the School Climate Committee into the chat. In case you want to follow along, if you don't already have the strategy, you can find it there. Thank you for doing that, Elise. I'll walk through 3 components today of that strategy. The first one will be gathering the right group of students, how to do that, think clearly about that. The second will really be about collecting and using data. And then the third step that we'll focus on is helping students make an impact and thinking about how to understand whether or not we're having an impact and what to do about that. Also want to note really quickly that among all of our strategies at Making Caring Common, this one is moderately difficult, or I should say it requires a little bit more effort than something like our circle of concern or relationship mapping strategy. That said, it can have a really significant impact on I think, on your school's culture and climate, if you're ready to put in a little bit of that extra effort. So make sure to stop by the website after or during this webinar to check out our many lower lift strategies, or go ahead and, as I said, enroll in our Caring Schools Network. Let me know if I can be helpful in any of those regards. I'm always happy to talk through how to modify or complexify or extend any of the strategies that we speak about each month. So before we even jump too deeply in here, again, I would love to just ask a quick question of you. I'll open up the poll question so that you all can see it. And the poll question is, how often does your school involve students in conversations about school culture and climate? So let's go ahead and launch that poll. And if you should see it popping up. And if not, any second now, it should be showing up for you. It would be great to hear from you. Again, how often does your school involve students in conversations about school culture and climate? I think you should feel free to understand this question pretty broadly and pretty liberally in terms of what that could mean. But it looks like we do have pretty good participation, about 70% of folks who have already responded. If we could just maybe get that up over 80%, I'll close that out and share those results with you so we can see what our peers here today seem to think. And it looks to me like the majority of people, about 36% on the call today, are rarely involving students in conversations about school culture and climate. We've got about 28% of folks saying sometimes, 26%, 1/4 of you just about, are saying often. And then very few of you, just one of us on the call today, saying always. So maybe that person can serve as a role model for some of us. And also, if you have thoughts about any of what I have to say, would love to hear your feedback. Okay, so I'll take down that poll question now. Just want to share that forming a school climate committee like this really matters because I think it addresses some of the most important issues of our day. It really kind of meets the moment that we're in. I think that now, perhaps more than at any other point in our recent history, at least, students are really struggling to connect with one another, with the school. And that this strategy is meant to strengthen the relationships between staff and students. It's meant to do things like reduce bullying and promote a positive culture and climate, and that it's driven by students. And so I think that we have this incredible opportunity with the strategy to form a group of young folks with attention to diversity and equity, and really could be a useful tool in those directions. So excited to share more information about it with you today. And I think that it really does kind of stand up and meet the moment in some important ways. The first step of this process that we're thinking about and talking about today will be to select 2 adult facilitators who will represent the school's values, who might be either respected by the student body or well liked by the student body. These facilitators can be really any adult member of the school community, including guidance counselors, administrators, coaches, and of course, teachers. Selecting students, though, can be a little bit more challenging, of course. So I think that there are multiple factors to consider. And the first one that you might want to think about is how this group will be selected. There are several options, as I said. Those options are included in the strategy itself. So feel free to take a closer look at the how-to strategy that we shared a link to earlier in the chat. We'll do that again by the end of the webinar. With all that said, though, I think having students complete something like an application, for example, might create a barrier. And it might mean that students who are already heavily involved in school groups or are already participating quite a bit would be more likely to join. So the other option is to have school adults appoint a portion of the committee itself. Perhaps 2/3 of the school climate committee is chosen by adults. We're going to want to remember to advertise the group really heavily, announce its creation in things like assemblies, ask for advisory teachers to promote it, and really try and get the word out to as many different types of students as possible. This is going to ensure that all students in the school, not just the most involved students, hear about it, know what it is, and understand maybe the commitments and also the sort of the power, frankly, that they would hold as a committee member. I think that whether or not students are involved in the decision of how this committee is formed, or facilitators are selecting all of the students on the committee, you'll still need to consider things like social capital and equity, the equity of access, that is, to the board, and the process by which we're really kind of getting people involved. So we may want to consider those ways that we send the message about these types of opportunities. And it would be really important that we're thinking about the diversity of the group itself by almost any definition of that word. So whether that be race, gender, sexual orientation, nationality, religious orientation, primary language at home, etc. And the larger the school, of course, the more challenging it might be to get a sort of full and complete sense of all of the different groups who must be represented. But to the extent possible, let's use existing school level demographic data is sort of one way to really tackle that issue, and try and make comparisons and contrasts between the makeup of the board and the demographics of the school writ large. Next, we're going to take a quick look at an example school here. So Lakeview High, we'll check in with them from time to time. This might just give you a sense of what it could look like in an actual school to do this. And I should say that I have created, as an English teacher and as a wellness coordinator in a large public high school here in Massachusetts, committees such as these, similar to this. There are ways to modify this meaningfully if there are already committees or groups within the school who are doing this work. The structure that we outline in the how-to guide can serve as something like a framework for you if a group already exists and has a particular focus. We think it's a really good idea for school leaders, though, to have a network of others before they even jump into this work that they can lean on and gather information from about how to leverage student leaders. So that's one thing I would just put a flag in and say, if you don't already have folks who maybe you're connected to and who could help you talk through and think through the considerations here, please do be in touch. We have a large network of school leaders with whom we're in contact, and they can be really helpful in terms of bouncing ideas and just serving as thought partners. Once the principal in our sample school here, though, has had the chance to kind of run this idea for a student-led climate committee by fellow school leaders and hopefully as well staff, all school adults should have an opportunity to select this group of students. This is how our sample school went about it. The faculty chose 5 students, and then the student body did the same thing. They decided to keep confidential which students were nominated by faculty and staff and which students were nominated by students. And I think that that's a great way to go about it, because it means that folks don't necessarily know which students were chosen in which ways. That kind of creates an equal playing ground for everybody, I think. In this case, the school also decided to limit the committee to just juniors and seniors, so just students in 11th and 12th grade. That might be something that works for you in your school, to have just the older folks, the older students joining. Maybe not. Maybe you want to have that diversity of age built in as well, and I think that that's fine. I think that's totally okay as well. To the extent possible, and with some support, right, from guidance, from support and guidance from adults, students should decide when and how to conduct the meetings themselves, how to really actually engage together. This might mean drafting a code of conduct together, or creating norms and bylaws. But students should be driving some of those conversations about how they're going to make decisions. Things like, when will meetings occur? Will there be an agenda, and who will create it and share it? All of those sorts of things are helping students really build some of these leadership skills and putting the power in their hands to make key decisions about how this committee will operate. Adult facilitators will want to really understand and take seriously their role, which will be a little different. And they want to be careful to provide lots of support and ensure that the committee itself, this group of students, upholds the school's core values, for example, and is both using and properly analyzing and understanding data in their process. And then planning with students, I think, based on those data, the kinds of interventions that might be scalable and might be workable. So facilitators, adult facilitators, will need to really secure, things like meeting places, for example. Students might not have access to the roster of available rooms even. Adult facilitators in our virtual environment might be creating the links to meet together. And really helping students kind of meet the expectations and the responsibilities they set for themselves through things like emailing and nudging and sort of outlining specific tasks if necessary. There's also additional information about this in the supplementary document that is in the strategy. So be sure to check out that resource. It can provide tips and some clear expectations around the different roles that adults and students might play. So while the adult facilitators will want to provide support around logistics, things like skill development and securing certain resources over time, I would also recommend that they start to gradually step back. And hopefully by the end of the year, students are really doing a good amount of the logistics, the planning, the convening, the execution of tasks and things like that on their own. That's the gradual release of these responsibilities is part of the process and part of the learning that takes place for students. Okay, another quick poll from me. I'm going to go ahead and open this one up. Question is, does your school collect school culture and climate data? If yes, how often are you doing this? So we've already got about 6% of people responding. Do let us know. No, we don't collect any data. Yes, maybe formally and frequently. Maybe some of us are saying yes, formally and frequently. It looks like we've got about half the people already have responded. So yeah, do let us know. Does your school collect school culture and climate data? If yes, how often? And I will go ahead and close the poll. Looks like we have most people answering. About 40 people respond, and it looks like the winner here is formally but infrequently. So folks, the majority, 40% of us, are formally and infrequently collecting school culture and climate data. Okay, and I will go ahead and share those results with you so you can take a look at them. For those who said yes, one thing I'm wondering is, does your school review or share its culture and climate data with students? Feel free to hit up the chat, let us know. How are you doing that? Are you doing it? If you're not, why? If you are, tell us about that as well. I think it's important to ground decisions in good analysis of data and good data collected from students, maybe from families and staff and faculty. You may already administer a culture and climate data, a culture and climate survey. And if not, again, please do get in touch with us if you're interested in doing so. Making Caring Common has surveys. We would be happy to help you administer, analyze, and interpret those surveys. And I think that while it's really important for us to use the data, it's important for students to see how to do that and to recognize that it is important to use information of this sort. It's also important to share the data in a way that will provide the student body kind of a rationale for why we made the decisions about certain kinds of follow-up. We want to be able to both gather good information, analyze and interpret it, but also share it in ways that are meaningful for the student body so that they understand we asked you some questions, you told us, you took the time to tell us what you thought, and now we're going to really follow up on that. And this is what that looks like. That has a tendency to create better buy-in and therefore promote better and stronger culture and climate. So checking back in with Lakeview High here, our sample high school, we can see the committee has reviewed the data and provided some observations, noting those key strengths and challenges. They supported those responses with evidence, right, and matched their concerns to the existing supports. So these are all things, again, that we want folks to not only be doing, these students in the committee to be doing, but we really want to share that we're doing these things as a way of getting some buy-in from the rest of the student body. It may sound tricky, but honestly, many of the students I was working with were even more aware of things like student groups that are already tackling various issues, right? Their kind of combined and collective wisdom will almost certainly surprise you. It certainly did surprise me when I was working with students in this way. But ultimately, Lakeview students did decide to focus in on connections between students and staff. I think a terrific area of focus for any school, but especially schools right now. So moving away from Lakeview for a second and back into the strategy, I think that every school's plan to address the data will, of course, look a little bit different. But we've distilled a few important details here to help your team build a successful initiative. So make sure to celebrate and acknowledge the strengths in the data, really important step. I think this is, again, also going to help you get buy-in from the school and kind of show that you aren't just focused on what isn't working, right? It's also going to help you formulate a plan that will enable you to leverage the strengths that exist in the school already. So really highlighting those, sharing about them, that can be a really important and helpful step. In order to address the challenge areas that arise from your analysis of the data, you're going to want to determine the resources that will be needed to reach intended goals, right? Sometimes students don't fully understand how hard it is to do some of the things that they intend. So ask the group to kind of justify maybe why they believe a certain plan will work. And without discouraging them, we can be asking questions that will help them understand the challenges they actually face with any given initiative. I think to determine how you know if your plan worked, I would also draft some criteria for success. So having them think about what success might look like and how we might measure that is important. And that will also help you, I think, help guide you and the students with whom you're working toward an initiative or an idea that is concrete, that is actionable, that we can actually bring to scale within the school. We'll want to do this ahead of time, right? We'll want to do this at the beginning. It also shows them what it looks like to plan school-wide initiatives, right? And to really understand that it's not enough to feel like something is going to work. We need good evidence to suggest that it will. We also want to understand the impact of our efforts. We want to know that we can measure the impact of our efforts. So finally, I would say you'll want to, again, determine those resources that will be needed. Also want to think about the timeline for the completion of any given project. And of course, who will be in charge for specific and individual tasks. Just a few ideas here on this slide that came from students with whom I worked. They used our MCC Caring Schools Network data, as well as other forms of data that we had already collected in the school to think through and determine their interventions. They tracked down some funding, which was I had virtually nothing to do with that part. They really took it upon themselves, and it was kind of amazing to watch. Reached out to some necessary school and community partners on their own. It really kind of made the idea that they had a reality. And my co-adult leader and I were sort of there for support, but by and large, the seniors and the juniors who were on our committee that year drove the train. as I mentioned, I did this in a large public high school, and some students came up with ideas that I never would have envisioned would work or have any kind of effect. But after a sort of a large review of our school culture data, the team decided to, again, track down some funding and buy a mascot suit, which, in case you're wondering what I look like in a mascot suit, I can always follow up on this webinar with some photos. It's quite a sight. But the responses were sort of overwhelmingly positive to this. And again, the adults that I was working with probably would not have considered this as our intervention first. Another terrific idea, I think, that that students can do, or that my students came up with, was the donut day. They contacted a local Dunkin' Donuts, provided a whole bunch of free hot chocolate, the franchise nearby, as well as some munchkins. And as students were walking into the building that day, everybody got a couple of munchkins and a hot chocolate. There was also a little card attached to that, encouraging them to take a kind action, or express some thanks, or do something nice, reach out to someone in the school community that maybe they wouldn't have otherwise reached out to, and they might have overlooked. So kind of connecting food and surprise and gift giving with doing the right thing and reaching out and caring for those who are perhaps different than us, or maybe just off of our radar, I think was a really powerful way of approaching school connection and relationships. And again, I don't know that it was an idea that we would have come up with as adults, but the students did, and it really worked in a way that I would not have anticipated. Okay. Let's see. Another terrific idea that I wanted to talk through. Well, first, maybe some ideas that Lakeview, right, came up with. Assigning students, for example, to several different advisors throughout the year, so that they get a wider array of adults with whom they're interacting. Great idea. I think some logistics involved in that, but nonetheless, I think a really powerful idea. Increasing some homeroom time, again, not always easy. For any school leaders out there who are listening, I know how hard school scheduling can be. I'm not suggesting that this is an easy intervention at all, but it could be a multi-year idea or intervention. But introducing student-teacher lunch days, I think, could be easy enough. And those were some of the ideas that our Lakeview students came up with. So there you go. Okay, that was a lot of information very quickly. And I want to make sure that we leave plenty of time here today to answer questions. So if you have them and you'd like to follow up on this webinar afterward, please do let me know. Otherwise, I will open this up for questions and answers. To those of you who are hopping off now and need to head out to some other adventure, thanks again for joining us. I love getting to engage with you all this way. And again, any questions whatsoever, I hope that you'll feel free to follow up via email or check out our website. We'll drop some links for you all. And again, to those of you who are heading out, it was wonderful to be with you. I hope that you'll reach out if you have questions. For everybody else, I'm going to go ahead and open up the question and answer box now. Start to take some questions.